welcome, a very warm welcome to everyone today. So some very brief housekeeping information from us today. We do have a 1-hour session and we'll endeavour to finish on time today. We are expecting quite a high number of attendees today, so we're asking for contributions and participation from you, but that will need to be using the chat function either on Teams tonight, because I guess it's about protecting the environment when we have lots of microphones and cameras on. So we're really interested in what you've got to say, and we can use the chat function for that. We're also going to use some online polling software at slido.com, so you may be able to have a second window open for that, or another internet browser, and indeed perhaps even a mobile device for that. So thank you very much for that in advance. So let's take a quick look at what we're proposing to do in this session. It's not just me speaking today, I'm pleased to say. So my name is Fiona Campbell and I work in the Professional Liaison Service at the HCPC. So my role really is around upholding standards in practice and recognition of some of the challenges that registrants have in maintaining higher standards of practice. So I'm also joined by my colleagues in policy. So we've got Rosemary, Flowers-Wanjie and Maheshi Silva who are joining us later in the session today. So today what we're going to do then is take a brief look at the role of the HCPC and the range of standards that are currently in place for registrants of the HCPC. And really the purpose of this session today is to be exploring those updates to the standards of conduct, performance and ethics that are out for consultation at the moment, specifically in relation to ED and I. So in order to do that, we will be taking a close look at what the standards currently say in relation to equality, diversity and inclusion. And then, of course, we'll move on to exploring the proposed updates to the standards for this particular theme. So you'll hear from us at different points. We might refer to these as the new standards or the updated standards, and both terms are in fact synonymous in respect of this evening's session. So my colleagues will then also talk about post-consultation activities that you can expect from the HCPC and some of the timescales that are involved. So if you want to introduce yourselves and chat, that would be amazing to hear who's in the session today and any information that you've got to share, and I'll just continue to progress with the session at this point. But please do, in fact, let us know who you are if you're willing to. We've got quite a large number of people joining us, so thanks in advance. So a very quick piece of information about the HCPC, because I very much recognise that most of you joining us today will in fact know about what we do here at the HCPC, but we're a statutory regulator and we regulate 15 different professional groups. So that makes us quite unique in the regulatory world, if you like. Our role ultimately is about public protection and maintaining confidence of the public in the professions that we regulate. So at the heart of our mission is really to be upholding high standards in the professions that we regulate. And our regulatory functions are quite vast at the HCPC. So obviously tonight we're thinking very much about setting appropriate standards and looking at revising and updating these standards. We also have a role around responding to fitness to practice concerns when these arise. And we have further roles around quality assuring education programmes and maintaining and publishing that register of professionals who meet the standards. But importantly, the HCPC also has learning and preventative functions. So we really want to use our learning at the HCPC to be addressing and reducing the conditions that may in fact be contributing to instances of service user harm. And really this preventative approach is really about us trying to support quality practice by having conversations and articulating the expected standards, but importantly helping registrants overcome barriers that they can face in meeting these standards and thereby reducing hopefully the need for unnecessary fitness to practice actions. I'm actually an HCPC registrant myself. I'm a speech and language therapist and I'm very well aware of working in a very busy National Health Service role. In the past, I've also worked in the university sector, and there's very much an understanding that we don't really work in linear roles anymore, and that the standards that we have at the HCPC need to really take account of the context in which our busy registrants are working. So I work as part of the Professional Liaison Service, as I think I've already mentioned. So let's take a quick look today at where this all sits and the main standards, if you like, that the HCPC has. Again, as a very brief reminder of the various sets of standards that the HCPC has. So again, the focus of tonight is the standard of conduct, performance and ethics, and these are the standards that outline what the public can expect of you, registrants of the HCPC, and there are 10 standards, and we're going to talk about those more in a moment, and indeed for the rest of the session. But also we've got, very importantly, the standards of proficiency. Now I've specifically picked occupational therapists here because in fact we've got 15 different professional groupings, so it would be difficult to show them all. So no particular preference here towards our occupational therapists, just the diagram that I chose for this evening. But our standards of proficiency are key. Also, these are the threshold standards that are necessary for people, to protect the public. Every single professional group has its own standards of proficiency with some shared standards among all of the professional groups. And these are really setting out the very clear knowledge and abilities that we expect all registrants to have when they start out in practicing their profession. So they are the floor, entry level, as opposed to the ceiling. And you, in fact, may well be aware that the standards of proficiency have currently updated and will launch from September 2023. So there's lots of changes to the standards of proficiency. And of note within that, and relevant to this evening, is that the focus of equality, diversity and inclusion has increased quite significantly in the standards of proficiency too. So there's much more focus in the new standards of proficiency on making sure that practice is inclusive for all service users. And also, last but by no means least, we have the standards for continuing professional development, so the way that registrants keep their knowledge and skills up to date throughout their career. And these are really the standards for ongoing learning and development, with lots of resources available on our website to support that. So that's a very, very brief overview of the main sets of standards. But of course, our focus this evening is on those all-important standard of conduct, performance and ethics. And as they stand at the moment, there are 10 key standards. And these standards are really important, of course, because they in fact set out in very general terms how we would expect all registrants to behave, and importantly outline what the public would really expect from their health and care professional. They help us here at the HCPC, if a concern is raised, to think about our registrants' practice and consider when things go wrong, and help us to decide really whether in fact it's important to take necessary action. And they also, at the point of entry to the register, help us make decisions about the character of professionals who apply to our register, and at the point of re-registering with us every 2 years. So those are the standards as they currently sit. They're detailed standards, 10 of them, broken down into many, many different subpoints. And I guess the importance of the standards is that they're not prescriptive, but instead provide that very important high-level framework which registrants would be using to practice. So we believe that that high-level approach is a good thing, as it gives you the autonomy as very, and flexibility really as skilled professionals to practice in the way that you need to and have to. So therefore, how to kind of meet the standards and what is and is not appropriate would really depend on the circumstances in which you work, your individual practices, the context in which you're working. And this is why we often say that it's important to use professional judgment to assess ultimately what is safe and effective practice for you and in the context in which you're working. A colleague of mine describes, all of the standards at the HCPC is a bit, rather than GPS, it's a bit like an ordnance survey map where we kind of map our own way to the summit, if you like, plenty of ways to achieve good practice. And it wouldn't be our job as a regulator to tell you exactly how to practice in every situation. So the standard of conduct, performance and ethics is out for consultation. The updates to those, we're actively in our consultation launch at this particular moment in time, and the history leading up to that is that we've had a range of pre-consultation workshops and a pre-consultation survey. So we've hosted workshops with different stakeholder groups. So if any of you have joined those, thank you very much for that, and any stakeholder could feed into the workshops and the survey. So really throughout this, we really gathered some insight about how individuals are currently using the standards, what they think of them, and what changes the standards may in fact need by way of update. So the main consultation has launched. It launched on the 27th of March, and we intend really to be going forward and publishing updates to the standards in September 2023, with a kind of year-long implementation period which will lead to the standards becoming live and in full effect from September 2024. So that's my short part of today's session over. I'm going to pass over to my colleague now, Rosemary Flowers-Wanjie, who's going to take over from this session, but I'll be around in the background in chat to hear what you all have to say. But we greatly value your time today and your support today, and I'm really looking forward to being a part of this event with you. So over to Rosemary.
Thank you, Fiona, and hello everyone. I'm Rosemary Flowers-Wanjie, a Policy Manager at the HCPC. Today I'll be talking to you about some of the changes that we have proposed to the standards of conduct, performance and ethics, specifically those relating to equality, diversity and inclusion. Before we talk about the proposals in relation to EDI, we want to hear from you about what changes would you like to see relating to equality, diversity and inclusion in our new standards, proposed standards of conduct, performance and ethics. To contribute your thoughts, you can use slido.com. You've got some instructions here. So you'll go onto slido.com and enter the code EDI, and you'll be able to write your contributions there anonymously. You can also use the QR code that's on the screen now, and that again will take you to Slido, or you can enter your thoughts into the chat function and just type those out. We'll refer to your contributions during the session, but like I said, they are anonymous if you share them on Slido. So going on to our next slide now, based on our pre-consultation engagement, we identified 5 main areas of change to the standards of conduct, performance and ethics, which you can see on the slide here. They are equality, diversity and inclusion, communication, duty of candour, upskilling and training responsibilities, and managing existing health conditions and disabilities in the workplace. We've also discussed sustainability as a possible area of change to the standards of conduct, performance and ethics, and this has been included in our public consultation. Each of our consultation workshops is dedicated to exploring one of these themes. And as I said, today we are here to talk about the equality, diversity and inclusion side of the proposals that we've made. So the standards of conduct, performance and ethics, as Fiona reminded us, are split into 10 standards. And we'll just go on to the next slide. And these break down into further detail. On this slide here, you can see the main changes that we have made to our standards 1.5, 1.6 and 1.7. These standards relate to how we expect HCPC registrants to challenge discrimination. Since the changes we have proposed, the standards now feature a simple obligation to treat people fairly and to think about the potential impact that one's values, biases and beliefs could have on others. We've also added more active language to ensure that registrants take action to ensure that they do not discriminate against others. Lastly, we've proposed changes to the way in which we expect registrants to interact with those that are discriminating against others. So going on to the next slide, many of the changes that we have made are based on stakeholder feedback in our pre-consultation period. So as Fiona mentioned earlier, we did have pre-consultation workshops and also a pre-consultation online survey that we hosted last year. And for example, we were asked by participants in our workshops and also on the survey to retain the simplicity of the standards and to be clear about the expectations that we have of registrants. Many of the changes that we have made are based on this stakeholder feedback during our pre-consultation period. As I said, and one of the primary reasons for our changes to Standard 1.6 is to ensure that we make registrant responsibilities clear. We expect registrants to be active in challenging discrimination within themselves. This includes thinking about the ways our own values and beliefs will impact others and ensure that they do not interrupt service user access to care. This is also in line with the changes that we have made and implemented to the standards of proficiency. An active approach to discrimination promotes registrants being autonomous and caring professionals who use their sound professional judgment to make person-centred decisions about the care that they provide. We've also responded to feedback in our pre-consultation workshops and survey that participants were concerned about the way in which the standards required them to challenge those who they witnessed discriminating against others. Registrants were concerned about finding a safe way to do that And we at the HCPC wanted to make it clear that we do not expect a registrant to put themselves in an unsafe situation, no matter the circumstance. For example, our previous standard 1.6, which you can see here on the slide, requires registrants to simply challenge colleagues if they think they have discriminated against or are discriminating against service users, carers, or colleagues. To help improve the clarity of this standard, we've adjusted the wording to require registrants to raise concerns if they think that a colleague is treating people unfairly or if their values, biases, or beliefs are leading them to discriminate. And we've highlighted that registrants should do this whilst maintaining the safety of all involved. As mentioned earlier, it's great to hear from you in relation to these proposals. And that really is what the consultation period is all about. I hope that while I've been talking, you've been busy on our Slido function, sharing your views about EDI and the standards of conduct, performance and ethics. And on the slides here, you'll see some questions that will be available for you to answer in a poll that I'm just about to launch now. And you'll be able to see it on the screens. It should pop up in just a couple of seconds. So you can see here that we are asking, is EDI an area of concern for you? And we've got a couple of options there, just quite simple ones. Always, sometimes, rarely, or never. And I can't see who's saying what, so don't feel shy. Please do feel free to submit your answer. And I can see great, so many responses. It really is so helpful to hear what people think about these issues. And we've got a few people who don't really think about, who don't feel that EDI is a concern for them. And yeah, if you'd like to tell us why, then please do so in the chat. Again, it's always helpful to hear from you. Also, use the Slido function as well. Got quite a few people saying always, lots of people saying sometimes as well. And yeah, I do really want to stress here that with these questions, there really is no right answer. What is important is that we hear your honest answers. So it's great to see your feedback. You should see the second question in our poll come up on your screen now. That asks, are the suggested changes to 1.5 to 1.7 that focus on equality, diversity and inclusion and challenging discrimination, are they clear? Great. So again, straight in there with the responses. Thank you, everybody, for being so engaged. So yeah, this question is specifically in reference to the changes that we're looking at today. Those changes to 1.5 to 1.7. And it's good to hear 65% of people who've responded so far have found that the changes that we've proposed are clear. And we've got 30%. Oh, it's changing a little bit here. So 27% saying that they're somewhat clear. And we've got a small percentage of people saying that they're not clear at all. So again, please do share your specific thoughts on this subject in the chat and also on Slido as well. And of course, as well, whilst we love to hear your feedback today, please also do remember to respond to our open public consultation. I'll pop the link into the chat right now so that you have it there for your reference. And yeah, responding to our consultation gives you the opportunity to tell us more about what you think of our proposals and to really go into detail about the specific proposals that we've made. So I hope I'll be seeing many of your responses in the coming weeks. And just a reminder as well that that public consultation does close on the 16th of June. So yeah, please do, whilst you have time, respond to that consultation. And if you haven't done so already, read the commentary on the changes, the proposed changes that we've made, and the other documents that are available as well. So I'll move on to the next slide now. So alongside our proposed changes to the standards of conduct, performance and ethics, we've also revised our guidance on social media. We've introduced further information to clarify that we expect all registrants to use social media in a way that honours all of our standards, including those on challenging discrimination. So, for example, in relation to standard 1.6 that you can see on the slide here, this means that registrants must ensure that what they share on social media about their personal views, biases and beliefs does not lead to the hindrance of people's access to the services that they provide. This is another example of it being a registrant's responsibility to actively consider and to minimise the impact of their values, beliefs and biases on the services that they provide, and also on the reputation of their profession. And so those are some of the things that we need to think about when we're posting on social media. I can see that we've got an active discussion going on in the chat, and that's very helpful. So I do just want to point to a question that we have had, which is how will the HCPC be acting upon their own equality, inclusion and avoiding discrimination within the fitness to practice process and those who have protected characteristics and health conditions? So I can say that in relation to the standards of conduct, performance and ethics, we have, and the review that we've done to those standards, we have completed a full EQIA, which is available on the website, and that talks about some of the ways in which the proposed changes that we've made impact different protected characteristics. So I think if you're interested to hear more about that, it would be very helpful for you to read the EQIA. And like I said, it is available on the consultation web pages that I posted into the chat a little while later. And in addition to that as well, my colleague Maheshi will be picking up talking about some of the next steps that we'll be making as well, in terms of once the consultation has closed and making sure that our standards of conduct, performance and ethics, when they are released and finalised, that they have a positive impact on people on protected characteristics, and that we identify the different ways in which our proposed changes may make a difference to people's protected characteristics. And as Fiona said in the chat as well, if you do have any questions on that or any comments as well, you can always reach the policy team at policy at hcpcuk.org. And that's in the chat as well, so do have a look. So I will hand over to my colleague Maheshi now, who will talk about our next steps in the review, and we'll move and yeah.
Thank you, Rosemary, and hello everyone. I'm Maheshi de Silva, Policy Officer at the HCPC. So as Rosemary's mentioned briefly earlier, we received feedback during our pre-consultation activities. So whilst the standards are accessible, some stakeholders may benefit from more explanatory materials for the standards. So we've therefore proposed the setting up of a pre-launch explanatory materials design group. So members of the group will read the final standards and provide advice on the explanatory materials that would be helpful for readers who are, for example, living with disabilities or neurodiversity, or where English is their second language. We will also set up a pre-launch reading group to further meet our commitments towards equality, diversity and inclusion. So this group will be set up to ensure that we understand the potential impact of the new standards on people with protected characteristics. And the group will be made up of people with from a variety of backgrounds, such as people of colour, people with disabilities and international registrants. Members of the group will then read the final standards before their publication and provide us with valuable feedback. So once the consultation is finished and we've collated responses, we hope to launch the new standards in autumn 2023 to ensure that the new standards are fully disseminated and understood widely. We will then have a year-long implementation period in which we aim for the standards to come into effect in September 2024. We want to keep the conversation about the standards of conduct, performance and ethics going. So therefore, our activities in the implementation period will include workshops with registrants and other stakeholders to learn more about what meeting the new standards will look like in practice. So this period will also be focused on ensuring that education providers, our internal teams and registrants are ready for the standards to come into effect in September 2024. It will also allow our internal teams and education providers to integrate the new standards into their materials, processes and curriculum effectively. Now, just before we close off for today's session, I'll just check our Slido to see if there's been any further responses to see if there's been any more that's come in, and pan over to the team to answer. So we've had a few there, and feel free to comment on either of those, Rosemary and Fiona.
Hi Maheshi, it's Fiona.
Hi.
Can I? Sorry, I'm terrible for butting in, but it's quite a busy Slido. I mean, I think this is one of these things, isn't it, that it's quite nice to leave it open, because it's, you know, something that people will be formulating lots of thoughts on. But I can see lots of topics coming in, I see an interesting comment, just because I've worked myself in independent SLT for a short time. I can see there's some question marks coming in around how this would relate to funding for interpreters and access to services. So it's just, that's the particular one that stood out for me just now. So yeah, and lots of really interesting things to think about. So if we leave it open at the moment, you know, we're running quite ahead of time here, but it would be useful, I think, to keep this open, you know, for a good while, and for people to continue to contribute. And if you've got any other ideas, please do pop them in, because you can contribute more than once, which is the nice thing about Slido. Great. I don't know if you've got anything to add, Rosemary, from anything you've spotted on our Slido and in chat. We have a question here about, are you including service users to read the standards before release, and the involvement of the public really in this? And also this person mentions newly registered people.
Yes, so that's a really great question, and thank you for that. So what all of our consultation, the whole of our consultation is open for public viewing and public response. So service users, it is available to them for them to respond to, and all of the documentation that we've had is available for them as well. And again, in terms of that, we are trying to include people from different groups, different stakeholder groups, different backgrounds as well, in those working groups of reading the standards and then providing us with direct feedback. Those groups are fairly small, but they are specifically targeted groups as well. And so we hope to have service users in those groups, and possibly newly registered people as well. We are very much open to suggestions. So that is actually a good point to make as well. If you think of anybody you know who would be good for either of those working groups to volunteer to be part of them, then please do email the policy team, or I think on our slide, our sort of slide that's got the information on who to yeah, Fiona, if we could go to slide, I think it's slide 25 or something, the getting in touch slide. You can see my email there as well, and I'm more than happy to hear from people who'd like to volunteer for the working groups, and who'll be able to read the finalised standards before publication to give feedback to us as well. But as I say, the stage that we're currently at the moment, it is the public consultation, so you can read the proposed standards and the changes that we've made online, and you can also request paper copies as well, and you can provide your response to us via the consultation email address.
Rosemary, we've had a question in chat here just around what happens in the meantime where any equality and inclusion difficulties are not being addressed and don't follow the Equality Act, and it's such an important question, isn't it? Because I mean, for me as a registrant, I mean, if I can have a go really at kind of answering that, really, because we don't wait around, we can't wait around for any new standards to come into play, really, if we think that people are being discriminated against in practice. You know, the standards as they exist at the moment would encourage us to be actively kind of calling that out in their current format. And so, whilst I very much appreciate to the person, you know, the difficulties in whistleblowing, I think there's really essential processes that are in place to follow that. And I wonder if anyone else who's in the session today would also, kind of share what they would think about that, if you think that you are, witnessing or seeing practices that are not inclusive to all groups, and really how to challenge that. I don't know if you'd add anything extra to that, because I had one little thing extra I would say, because it kind of links a little bit to some comments in Slido. And whilst this is a listening exercise, and it's not necessarily around kind of how, responding to everything that everyone says, it is interesting because these standards someone has commented that they do focus on individual autonomy, yet of course most people, as we know, work in systems where cultures and managerial systems maybe don't necessarily allow us to, I'm putting words into this person's mouth here, but maybe allow us to raise things in a way that we might want to, and it's a most incredibly challenging, position to be in, the recognition that we work in kind of non-linear systems, complex systems, and in fact sometimes the cultures in which we work are not conducive to it. And what I would say, really, registrant to registrant, and in my role here, is that that's exactly the type of culture that we need to be speaking up, against, actually, and that the standards are therefore used as a support, really, that should be enabling registrants to be able to do that safely.
That's really helpful, Fiona, and I think it really connects to this other question that we have in the chat, that says the HCPC's focus is rightly on protecting the service user. However, our respondent here believes that we should also be including how professionals can be the target of discrimination from colleagues and should also be protected from unprofessional behaviour. And they've pointed out that if we do not protect each other, our ability to care for service users will be impacted. And they've asked, would this be something that the HCPC would consider including in these standards? So that is something that we really did consider, because we had a lot of conversations about that in some of our pre-consultation workshops, particularly around how to create sort of safe environments, especially when we are, when a lot of people are working in very complex situations, as Fiona has alluded to, and as other people have alluded to on our Slido chat as well. And one of the ways in which we've done that is in proposing some changes to the way in which people raise concerns about colleagues. So there's a section of the standards that you'll see in the proposed, particularly if you read the commentary on the proposals that we've made, in which we talk about making sure that colleagues understand how best to support each other when they witness somebody being discriminated against. So it's not just about raising concerns about a colleague or a colleague who is actively discriminating, if we witness them actively discriminating or impacting the service that they provide, or impacting a colleague and their own work as well. It's also about supporting the person who's on the other side of that, who's on the receiving side of that, and making sure that we raise concerns about their own well-being, and that we also support each other in that way. So it's really about having a full loop in terms of who we're talking to when things happen like discrimination or even bullying or harassment as well. So it is really about trying to create that supportive environment rather than it being quite focused on animosity and sort of and simply challenging.
Could I come in, Rosemary, as well? Because I
Sure,
totally
Fiona, go
agree with
ahead.
that as well, and I totally sign up to the point made by our participant here around, the fact is if we are not protecting one another from professional behaviour, then the culture is wrong, and that ultimately is going to clearly impact on patient safety. That standard 1.7, some of the changes, as you've mentioned, Rosemary, do actually point very specifically to, must raise concerns about colleagues if you think that they're treating people unfairly and or the personal values, biases and beliefs have led them to discriminate. And it says again, service users, carers and or colleagues. So they're very specifically mentioned in that change to the standard. So which hopefully is helpful, but again, keen for views on that.
Thanks, Fiona. That's really helpful addition. And yeah, I just want to say again, thank you everybody for being so active in the chat. It really is great to hear from everybody. And the purpose of these consultation workshops is really to hear from you, and it's to help also to provide the sort of background of how we got to the places in which the proposals in which we've put forward as well. And this conversation is quite continuous. We do have 5 other workshops coming up other than this one in the next couple of weeks. And then also in addition to that, during our implementation period, as my colleague Maheshi mentioned, we will be having further workshops as well. So that we can keep this conversation going, so that people can see the changes that have been made, and that we can also talk about what these changes look like in practice. As something, this makes me think about something that Fiona said earlier on in the session, that was about making sure that we're not here to give all the answers of how absolutely every single circumstance looks like and what to do. It's not GPS. These standards, it really is more about you yourselves understanding the standards from your context and where you are and the way in which you're working, the service users that you're working with, the colleagues that you're working with, and applying the standards to those different contexts. So that means that a lot of these things, they do look different. Who we raise concerns to about discrimination, about harassment, about bullying, that is going to be different depending on the different context that people are working within. And so when we're writing these standards, we have to keep that in mind and keep in mind that they are high level, so they're not prescriptive, so that they can apply to all the different professions that we regulate. So I'm just going to take another look at our Slido chat. Still some really helpful comments coming through. And a lot of people concerned about the systems and organisational structures that people are working within, and the different ways. I think we talked about the person who's talked about being an independent SLT, and they're providing translation services. And I think these standards, they really, again, going back to what I was just saying, like they really do recognise the different contexts that people are in and the constraints that people are under. And what is important is that as registrants, you do what you know you need to do on the basis of these standards, in order to put them into practice. And that really is what's important. Where there are external forces at play, we understand that there are some things outside of one's control. And the other one I wanted to pick up on was change the use of the word fair to equitable. These comments, particularly ones that are so specific, are so helpful for us to hear. And these are the kind of comments that we really welcome in our consultation responses. You know, like I said, there's documentation on the website, on the HCPC website, in relation to this consultation that goes through the different proposed changes that we're making, and you can see the detail and you can see the wording that we've used. And we are more than happy to hear from you on specific wording, on suggestions in which you would in which you would like to suggest to us. We obviously can't take on everybody's suggestions, but we will we read all of the responses, and all of the responses to the consultation are included in our analysis post-consultation as well.
Rosemary, we've had a comment in Slido just as a reminder, which is really helpful actually. I never quite have the confidence to write it, but someone has written we need to remember that HCPC regulate the registrant as opposed to the organisation. And you know, I realise there's just a subtlety, you know, in that difference. It's an important one, isn't it? And again, the person has really helpfully written what I wish I kind of said myself really is that if if anyone does feel that they or does know that they're the victim of discrimination, that they seek advice and support from the appropriate individuals, including professional bodies, unions, CQC, for the countries that applies to, or indeed ACAS, because actually these are extremely important issues that need to, issues around organisations and organisational culture are difficult, and we know that as we said before, our registrants work in difficult systems. Thank you to whoever contributed that.
That is really helpful, and so helpful to sort of bring that wider perspective in as well, to the, as they say, it's not just HCPC out there, and yeah, we do regulate registrants, and that's something that we've also had to remember ourselves in writing new standards. Some of the feedback that we got during our pre-consultation workshops and survey, they were very concerned with registrant well-being, and also how sometimes registrants can be on the receiving end of discrimination, bullying and harassment from service users. And unfortunately, we do not regulate service users, but it comes back down to creating the supportive environments that we can by encouraging our registrants to behave in a compassionate, kind manner, and following our standards as well in order to do those things. Is there anything else, Maheshi? Did you want to come in?
Yeah, I was just going to say it's a very helpful discussion. Lots to take away for the post-analysis consultation. I can't see any kind of more movement in the chat function. But I think lots more coming in on the Slido.
Could I suggest that if anyone feels that they've written anything in chat or in Slido that they would want to follow up with, that they take us seriously in our offer to get in touch with us? Particularly, I'm thinking here around policy, if it's a specific question around the consultation, and the details there are on screen. Can I quickly flick ahead and tell you a little bit about my service? Is that a bit indulgent, really? But I just wanted to
go ahead, Fiona.
I'm going to do it anyway because I'm in control of the slides. So I just wanted to talk to you a little bit about, we've got some My HCPC standards events coming up. Now, these are not about the standards of conduct, performance and ethics. These are about the changes that are rolling out in the new standards of proficiency. So we're two seminars in and we have 3 more to go. And of interest perhaps to those that are attending this today, that our next workshop is on the 23rd of May from 1 to 1:45 around equality, diversity, inclusion. So that's around the new standards of proficiency in this particular area, which I've already mentioned, have been upped quite significantly in relation to the proficiency that the HCPC would expect from registrants. That's not to say that these standards are going to be difficult to reach. It's because we think that a lot of this is happening in action at the moment, and I think it complements very well some of the changes that we're also seeing in relation to these new standards of conduct, performance and ethics. So do come along to that if you can. We're kind of well underway with our planning for this particular session. We hope it's a good one, but we also have some sessions on the new changes to the standards of proficiency in relation to leadership and also in digital skills and new technology. So you can navigate to these on our website. I'll try and pop a link in chat when I'm multitasking here, or you can use the QR code to take you to our main, quite complicated events page, which you can filter for events. But that really is kind of all I wanted to say really about that. So I'll pop back in case here anyone has any last minute kind of wish to write down our email addresses to get in touch with us, and you can tell me when you want to go to the final slide, Rosemary.
Okay. Thanks, Fiona. And we've got a few questions about whether the slides will be sent out and the comments from Slido. So yeah, they will be sent out in unison for you all to have a look, and there's lots to take away from that as well, which we'll be taking on this side. But I think that probably wraps up this session to an end. And we just want to say thank you to everyone for taking time out today to joining us. And please do get in touch. I don't know if you can just go back a few slides, Fiona, just onto the contacts, just in case people haven't got that down. So there's a few emails there. Professional liaison email, the policy inbox email, and registration and fitness to practice. Thank you once again, everyone, for joining, and that's goodbye from us.